Well, joining me live is the Shadow Attorney-General Michaelia Cash. Michaelia Cash, thank you for your time. Let's start with this announcement by the government this morning involving more funding for women's health, including for treatment of menopause, and more PBS subsidising of contraceptive pills and menopausal medication. What's your reaction? Does the opposition support it?
Yeah, look, we will support the announcement, and in fact, we'd match the announcement when we're in government. I am pleased, Andrew, that when I looked at the announcement, it very much builds on the work that we had already done as the former government. You may recall that we announced the 2020 to 2030 National Women's Health Strategy. The number one priority in that was actually maternal, sexual and reproductive health. So this very much builds on that. But also, I'm pleased to see that it builds on the historic investment that we had made in endometriosis and pelvic pain. And you might recall at the time that was being championed by Nicole Flint. We established the very first endometriosis-specific clinics. And I see that this announcement does, in fact, expand them. So again, we support the announcement. And I really am pleased, though, that it is a building on of the work that we had done already as the previous coalition government, but in particular, we had established nationally those endometriosis-specific clinics. Can I just say, Andrew, though, the one thing I am worried about, I am someone, and I think most people know, I'm pretty upfront about it. I've managed a chronic health condition now for over 30 years. I do spend time in doctor's surgeries. What is the one thing that is constantly now raised with me? The fact that it is so difficult now to find a GP that can bulk bill. 88% bulk billed when we left office, currently 77%. The conversation I have is people have never found it harder to find a bulk billing doctor. It is more expensive in terms of their out-of-pocket costs. But more than that, the worrying statistic, and this is what Labor hides from, in 2023-24, 1.5 million Australians didn't see a doctor because they couldn't get bulk billed. So whilst, yes, support the announcement, would match it in government, it doesn't actually assist in terms of getting access to a doctor.
All right, that's interesting because obviously the government's made a number of announcements about more bulk billing. They would claim they've lifted the bulk billing. But you have to
look at the statistics. Yep, Andrew, look at the statistics. The statistics don't lie. 88% when we left office, 77% now. And out-of-pocket costs, they are up. And the statistic is 1.5 million Australians avoided seeing a doctor because they just couldn't afford to and couldn't find that bulk billing doctor. That's a crisis in primary care.
They are about to go to a campaign saying your guy wanted to introduce $7 co-payments on doctors' visits. And we're
going to have a lot of scare campaigns. We're going to have a lot of scare campaigns.
Is the opposition promising to lift bulk billing places? Is that likely to be part of your policy?
Look at how we performed in government. Bulk billing under us was at 88%. Look at how Labor has performed in government. Bulk billing under them has dramatically fallen to 77%. Whoa. So we're going to have a lot of scare campaigns, Andrew, in the lead up to the next election. And what we will be dealing in is facts. The facts support the arguments and they disprove the scare campaigns that Labor are going to run. There is a crisis in primary health care. People are finding it difficult to get access to a bulk billing doctor. 1.5 million Australians avoided seeing a doctor in 2023-24. And that is something that Labor, refuses to actually acknowledge, but worse than that, is doing nothing to address.
There is a perception that Peter Dutton does need to win the votes of more women to win the election. Do you have your own plans for policies which will appeal to women?
Well, in the first instance, Peter Dutton has been very upfront that we will continue to develop and announce policies, in particular in the women's health space. And Anne Ruston has just been doing an outstanding job in talking to people across the board in that regard. But I have to say, as a woman who speaks to other women, I can tell you what the one issue is that they continue to raise with me. And that is, of course, the cost of living crisis. Whenever you go into a shop, you see a lot of women in shops. and a lot of women with children in shops, they'll come to you firsthand and they will say how expensive it is, how their mortgage repayments are killing them, how their energy prices are now crippling them. So the answer is yes. This is a cost of living election, Andrew. Albanese, you ask any person, do you feel better off today than you did when Mr Albanese was first elected? And the answer is no. It is as simple as that. So, when it comes to women, I can tell you the women I speak to, cost of living front and centre in every single conversation.
Indeed. Are you heartened by the state by-election results in Victoria?
Yeah. Look, good on Brad Dutton. And good on the Liberal Party in Victoria. It was a resounding result for them. And as Brad Dutton said last night, the feedback that they have had whenever they've been out on the ground is that Victorians, and in particular in the West, have been let down by state Labor. The reality also is for Victorians, and we know this, is they are being let down under the weight of both a state Labor government and a federal Labor government. I'm not going to get ahead of myself. There's still a long way to go in this federal election. But certainly from Western Australian perspective, we're actually in the midst of a state campaign. And Andrew, our state candidates are feeling incredibly frustrated at the moment because they knock on someone's door and they say, I'm the Liberal candidate for... And the only thing people want to talk about is how let down they feel by Mr Albanese. But as I said, there's a long way to go, but this is a cost of living election, and it comes back down to, you've got to honestly ask yourself, do you feel better off today than you did when Mr Albanese was first elected? And when you look at even the most recent employee, household cost of living index, that's an increase of 19.4%. As I said, the statistics alone justify the failure on the economic front, and in particular, the failure of Australians by Mr Albanese since he was elected.
Are there any federal implications from the Victorian results?
Oh, look, we'll have a very good look at them. And as I said, the feedback in Western Australia, certainly from our state candidates, is people want to talk about how let down they feel by Mr Albanese. Look, it was a strong result for the Liberal Party in Victoria, but it still was 2 state by-elections. But certainly when I talk to my federal colleagues, James Patterson in particular, the feedback he gives me is similar to when we're out and about in Western Australia. People do feel let down by the Albanese government, and they have very good reason to be when you look at the cost of living crisis that we're under. All
right, so it does raise the question, particularly when you talk about things being 19% up, and we've all experienced a bit of that, why you aren't further ahead in the polls. And one reason potentially could be everyone knows the US and the UK have had exactly the same inflation problems. And the other issue could be people aren't convinced by your leader yet. So what do you say to all that?
I would say to that, ultimately, again, people need to ask themselves, when you go to vote at this election, you are going to have a choice. At this point in time, the choice is going to be between Peter Dutton, who has clearly led the way when it comes to showing strength of leadership on national security and the protection of Australia and Australians, or this is now the reality for Australians, Andrew. You will not be getting an Albanese majority government. There is no credible political commentator who is now saying that that option is on the table. You will be getting Mr Albanese, despite everything that he says, governing in minority with Adam Bandt and the Australian Greens. So people say to me, do you think it can get worse for me, Michaelia? And the answer is yes. I think more and more people are looking to Peter Dutton for the strength of leadership. He has clearly set out a plan. We've released our vision for Australia in terms of our priorities. But more than that, when you have a crisis of anti-Semitism in this country, when you have acts of domestic terrorism, what is the one thing people look for? They look for strength of leadership. And the reality for Mr Albanese, and you saw it in the Senate and the House of Representatives, when they literally had to capitulate to Peter Dutton on the issue of mandatory sentencing for terrorism. There is one person that Australians are looking to and have looked to for leadership in protecting them, and we all want to feel protected, Andrew, and Peter Dutton is that person. Anthony Albanese, he's appeared drowsy, he's appeared disinterested. The fact that he can't answer a basic question about when he was first informed of a potential mass casualty event, a caravan filled with explosives, that is not a leader. Peter Dutton, more and more every day, you may not like him, but the decision at the next election is not about liking a particular person. The decision you need to make at the next election is, do I want a strong leader who backs me? Well, that's Peter Dutton. Or do I want a leader who, quite frankly, Andrew, the question I posed the other night is, does Mr Albanese even care anymore?
Look, it's almost like you've read my questions. I'm getting onto the anti-Semitism thing in a minute, Michaelia Cash, but you just caught me there when you said people may not like your leader. Why wouldn't they like him? Why do you think some people don't like him?
I think he's had incredibly tough portfolios in the past, but I think more and more people, Peter is out and about every single day. I walk into functions with him and people who've never met him before come out saying, wow, what a lovely, decent person he is. He has a sense of humour. He's self-deprecating. But more than that, this is a man who is principled, who knows what he believes in, who has a proven record in tough portfolios of making decisions that are in the best interests of Australians. I think the more people become aware of Peter's background, and in particular, the fact that, he was a policeman. He was someone who has dealt with the hardest of cases in the past. He was someone who, like so many Australians, gave up so much so that he could, save up for his first home. I think he resonates now with the Australian people. They acknowledge now that he has tough portfolios, but guess what? In those portfolios, he only ever made decisions that are in the best interests of the Australian people. Right. Since becoming the leader of the opposition, he has led the charge yet again in national security and keeping people safe. So as I said, the choice is pretty clear for people. Okay. Do you want a leader who is principled and believe in you, or?
Let's move on to this capitulation by the government on mandatory minimum sentences. Your area, you would have been involved, I assume, in Senate negotiations on this. What happened?
Yes, I was. It's a very good question, given that Murray Watt, only last week, I think it was last Monday, he made it very clear Labor would not be introducing minimum mandatory sentences. You have wide, reporting that Mr Dreyfus, as the Attorney-General, had made it very, very clear to leadership that he would not support such a change. But the issue Mr Albanese had was this. Yet again, Peter Dutton was seen as leading the way on national security. Mr Albanese, again, he appears drowsy. He appears disinterested. We had made the announcement. We were going to be pursuing these changes. We had drafted the necessary amendments, and then quite literally the government came to us and said they would agree to our amendments. The negotiations occurred, and then obviously the changes went through both the House of Representatives
my question was why,
and the Senate.
My question was why. You don't know why.
I can only assume because they literally, there is a crisis of anti-Semitism in this country. And as I said, Mr Albanese is now seen as a failed leader. So it was obviously panic stations all around. But ultimately, I asked Mr Albanese, asked Mr Dreyfus, why did you capitulate at the last minute to Peter Dutton?
Well,
this is a huge win.
I'm pretty sure Mr Dreyfus didn't support it internally. But anyway, do you think this will work? Do you think this will stop the crime we're seeing, these sentences?
I think it sends a very, very clear message to anybody who, A, is contemplating an act of domestic terrorism, or B, is stupid enough or disgusting enough to be out there displaying a prohibited hate symbol, including the swastika and the Nazi salute, or who is going to indulge in property damage in the most disgusting of ways. Go for your life, but guess what? We're on to you, and you will serve a minimum time in jail. It is simple as that. You need all tools at your disposal, and this sends a very clear message that Peter Dutton in particular is serious about national security, but also domestic terrorism and anti-Semitism.
Are you expecting an interest rate cut next week, and will it do anything to the prospects of the coalition?
Yeah. Look, there's always speculation, obviously, but ultimately this is going to be a matter for the Reserve Bank. But what I would say is this. Of course, we all want to see interest rate cuts, Andrew, but take a step back. An interest rate cut is not going to do anything to alleviate the person on the average mortgage who has had to find around $50,000 extra because of the 12 interest rate increases under the Albanese government. An interest rate cut is not going to help an employee household that has seen, employee household living expenses go up by 19.4%. It's not going to help the Victorians who've just sent a clear message to Jacinta Allen. The energy crisis is killing us. It is no longer about one interest rate cut, in particular when core inflation still remains persistently high and average inflation still has a 4 under it, when under the coalition, despite COVID, it had a 2 in front of it. So it's about getting the fundamentals right.
Did you say, hang on, did you say average inflation has a 4 in front of it? Did you say that?
Over the time in government, if you compare
over the 3 years. All right.
The coalition versus the Albanese
right now it's
government.
Right now it's 2.4. Anyway, just finally, Michaelia.
But the point being,
Michaelia Cash, just finally, when do you anticipate, should I say, the coalition will release its IR policy? Are you seeking to wind back multi-employer bargaining, the law as it relates to casuals, and the right to disconnect legislation?
We have already made announcements in relation to casuals and the right to disconnect, and it's not about winding them back. The changes both to the definition of casual and to the right to disconnect, they are complicated. They have sent a chilling effect, in particular across small businesses, and we have said, yes, we will seek to repeal them. I did a small business forum in Friday in Sydney with Giselle Kapterian, our candidate in Bradfield. I mean, if Mr Albanese does not understand the cost, the complexity and the confusion that our small businesses are under, not just because of the changes to industrial relation laws, but just the weight of regulatory burden, if he doesn't understand the 27,000 small businesses have gone insolvent under him, well, then shame on Mr Albanese. So will we be unashamedly pro-small business as we go to the next election? Yes, we will. They are the backbone of the Australian economy. 1 in 2 people are employed in them. And if you're not one of those people, I can guarantee you probably go into a small business on a daily basis. So will we do what we can to get rid of the cost, the complexity and the confusion? Yes, we will. And as I said, in that regard, we will seek to repeal those incredibly confusing changes to ensure that our small businesses are able again to prosper, to grow and do what we want them to do, Andrew. And that is just keep on creating more jobs for the rest of Australia. It's as simple as that.
Michaelia Cash, thanks so much for your time.
Great to be with you.